Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for joining us and wanting to spend the hour with us. It's great to see so many logged on today. My name is Emma Rathie. I'm the manager of programs and exhibition production here at the George Eastman Museum in Rochester, New York. Welcome to today's virtual conservation talk. From humidifying and flattening posters to building magnet mounts, today you will learn the conservation, preparation, and installation efforts that went into the current exhibition, Crashing into the 60s film posters from the collection. We are going to hear from Conservator in Charge, Taina Meller, Conservation Associate, Emily Phoenix, Interim Head Preparator, Michael Filipek, and Preparator Andrea Edwards. This exhibition is open through September 8th, so those that are in the area, I urge you to come visit on site and see the posters in the space. However, if you aren't able to join us here on site, we do have a virtual tour of the show on our website. I want to extend our appreciation to the exhibition sponsors today with major support for the 75th anniversary exhibitions provided by the Rubens Family Foundation. This exhibition is also generously sponsored by St. John's. If you have questions today during the presentation, please use the Q&A button. This should be located on the top or bottom of your screen, depending what device you're zooming in on today. And then at the end of the talk, we'll try and get through as many of these questions as possible. The chat function is open, but we do ask that if you have a question to put it through the Q&A because we will not be monitoring questions in the chat function. We are recording today's talk. We'll put this on our YouTube channel, and if you'd like to watch it again or share with others, you may do so. You'll find many of our other previous virtual talks and any other public programs on our YouTube channel. And without taking any additional time, I'm going to pass the mic over to Taina Meller to get us started.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you all for tuning in today.
I am trying to forward the slide, but it is not advancing.
Everything always goes real well when we are doing rehearsals, and then...
All right.
Okay, so those of you who attended the webinar last Friday heard the curators, Peter Pakarov and Nancy Kaufman, discuss the criteria for selecting the theme for this exhibition. One of them actually was the condition of the posters. So Peter and Nancy recognized that there wouldn't be enough time nor other resources to make an exhibition of, let's say, early cinema posters, which are absolutely wonderful, but generally in poor condition and in need of extensive conservation treatment. And when I say extensive conservation treatment, I mean washing and lining the entire poster, which is a rather common yet laborious and material-wise quite expensive treatment. So Peter and Nancy finally settled on the 1960s, and while there were several reasons for that, one of them was that these particular posters are in relatively good condition. In terms of conservation, we didn't track the exact project hours, and we, of course, were simultaneously working on other exhibitions and projects as well. But nevertheless, the 62 selected posters were the primary focus in our lab for about a year. And we also had 2 posters washed and lined by Gary Albright, who is an art conservator in private practice.
Again, I'm trying to advance, but it is.
Yeah, I knew that. Okay, so film posters, they come in different sizes and shapes, and the larger ones are often composed of 2 or more sections. The most common, so-called one-sheet poster, measures approximately 27 inches by 41 inches, while the largest, a 24-sheet billboard, approximately 9 feet by 20 feet. In this image, which is a current view from our gallery, there is a 24-sheet, a 3-sheet, 1 sheet, and a 6 sheet poster. Now, all these sizes and how they are called are based on the 1 sheet poster, which means that, for example, a 3 sheet poster is as large as 3 1 sheet posters together would be. Now, this can be just a little confusing because it doesn't mean that the 3 sheet poster has 3 separate sections. Instead, it usually has just 2 of them. The majority of the exhibition posters were donated to the museum in the mid-80s. They had been stored folded, and that's also how they continued to be stored if they were too large for our storage units. While the folding understandably was practical, it had also resulted in various handling-related damages. So as you can see here, especially the edges and the fold lines have all kinds of creases and tears and areas of losses. And the surfaces that had been exposed to the atmosphere might be a bit dirty and also discolored. So our first step was to carefully unfold the posters, assess and document their condition, and then clean any visible surface soil. Here you can also see some discoloration. So there is a fold line right here, and the area to its left is more yellow than the area to its right. The fold lines are clearly visible, but instead of considering them as defects, we see them as a part of the nature and history of this object. So our goal was not to remove them, but rather to reduce them so that the posters can be safely displayed and visually enjoyed. To do this, we first relaxed the posters by humidifying them and then dried and flattened them. We have a large, about 7 feet by 6 feet sink in our lab that we temporarily converted to a humidity chamber. So there's some water on the bottom of the sink, and then there is an even layer of plastic crates that prevents the posters to be in direct contact with water. For additional protection, we also have sheets of non-woven polyester web between the plastic crates and the posters. The polyester web, by the way, is a material that we use a lot in conservation for various purposes. The sink would finally be covered with heavy sheets of plexi, and that would cause the humidity in this chamber to rise. We would periodically check on the posters, but usually we'd let them stay here for about 7 hours and then dry and flatten them by placing them between blotting papers and underweight for a minimum of 24 hours. These are some before and after flattened images. So on the top are the before and on the bottom, the after images. And as you can see, the creases are not completely gone, but they are significantly reduced and no longer disturbing the viewing experience. The flattening also gave us a better understanding of the physical damages that needed our attention. So we mended all the tears, we compensated for possible areas of losses by making infills, we reinforced any weak areas, and so forth. For all these conservation treatments, we used Japanese paper, some of which you can see here, and wheat starch paste, which often is the adhesive of our choice. The little pillow-looking things in this image are weights, so we'd let the adhesive dry under blotters and weights, and as always, to prevent the blotters to adhere to the actual object we are treating, we would place a piece of that already mentioned polyester web between them. In conservation, our primary focus is always on stabilizing treatments and preservation, not on improving the appearance of the object. However, if these posters had image losses that were considered visually disturbing, we did in-paint them with watercolors. So here is an area before and after in-painting. And a couple of more examples. On the left, before, and on the right, after in painting. When we were done with the conservation treatments, we prepared the posters for mounting. All of the smaller posters were matted and framed, and to allow for that, we applied Japanese paper hinges with wheat starch paste to the top edges of them, as you can see here. If the posters were composed of multiple sections, we applied hinges between the sections along their horizontal seams only to hold them in registration. Many of these posters have either 2 or 4 sections, and there is that one billboard that has 12 sections. This picture, by the way, is taken in the conservation library and shows that even if our lab is quite large, it wasn't large enough, and we had to expand to some other spaces at the museum. This slide gives an idea of some of the registration challenges that we were facing. So in this poster, the bottom section needs to overlap the top, but if you compare the amount of the red ink on the left side of the letter T, you can see that they are not equal, which of course means that the red edge in this poster will not be perfectly aligned. However, it is important to keep in mind that these posters were not meant to be looked at up close, and therefore they didn't need to be perfect. Then I will just quickly go through our hinging process for the posters with multiple sections. So here are 2 out of 4 sections of this specific poster, and I am about to apply Japanese paper hinges along their horizontal seam. So in this case, the top section needs to overlap the bottom one, and as you can see in the image on the right, the left edge of this poster will not be perfectly aligned when the sections otherwise are in registration. To hold the sections in place during the hinging, we used weights, such as these here, and the small white weights here are holding down a strip of polyester web that, together with the white weights, will serve as a placement guide for my hinges. At this point, I have rolled back the bottom edge of the overlapping section, and it is held down again with some small weights. On the left is a Japanese paper hinge that I'm about to paste, and on the right, again, the polyester web and small weights that mark the locations of my hinges. At this point, I will apply the paste only to a part of the hinge, so I have a piece of plastic here, covering the other part and making the pasting easier. Now I have attached my first hinge, and then it is drying. On the left, all the hinges are drying, and on the right, they are ready to be attached to the other section of this poster. We, by the way, call these types of hinges V hinges because of their shape. And the reason why we chose to use them here is that in conservation, we always at least aim for reversibility. So if we instead attach the edges of these 2 poster sections directly to each other, it would be very difficult to detach them without causing damage. These V hinges, on the other hand, could be just easily and safely cut, which would right away separate the 2 sections. Okay, so next I would attach this part of the hinge to the other section of the poster, and to avoid the 2 parts of the hinge to attach to each other, I would place a piece of that polyester web between them here, and then remove it when the adhesive is dry. Okay, so now I'm back to that actual hinging process. On the left, you can see that I have a piece of blotting paper under the hinge while pasting it, and the purpose of the blotter here is just to absorb any excess moisture from the paste. Then after removing the blotter, I'm attaching the poster to the hinge and lightly burnishing the area for proper adhesion. And the reason why I'm doing the burnishing through a piece of polyester web is that without it, I would probably change the surface sheen of the poster, which is not what I want to do. Finally, the hinge rather is drying under the weight. Here, all my hinges are drying. And here they are dry, and I'm about to remove the pieces of the polyester web between them. Emily made us these lightweight tubes that were really, really handy when we needed to move the large posters from one location to another, or if we needed to access the back sides of them, like in this case. And here, finally, the two sections of this poster are in registration and hinged together. And at this point, I will pass it to Emily.
Thank you, Taina. So we started with the smaller poster sizes and worked on progressively larger sizes, which left the 24-sheet billboard size poster for last. I love this image on the left because you can see the difference in scale between 4 of the 6 different standard American sizes. So you have an insert size, 1 sheet, 3 sheet, and 24 sheet. And it's also really interesting that you can see the different ways that these are being used as advertising in the theater. The billboard is called a 24 sheet because the size, as Taina mentioned, is equivalent to 24 of the 1 sheet posters, and it is actually in 12 sections. And on the right, you can see the diagram of those sections stamped onto the back of the poster, which would have been a guide for the person installing it onto a billboard or a wall. The sections are arranged as 4 vertical columns and 3 horizontal rows. Fortunately, our billboards were never used for advertising. If they had, they would have been so badly damaged by the elements and by being adhered and removed from a wall that they likely would have been beyond repair. And you can see an example of the kind of damage a billboard may have had on the left. So our billboard was relatively in remarkably good condition, but with all the 12 sheet sections folded up together, there was some strain along the folds, and between the strain and handling, it did result in some damage and losses in those areas. So after surface cleaning and humidification and flattening, I made infills for the losses on the section along the outside of that folded group of sheets, which was a treatment that I really enjoyed learning and working on for these posters. To make the infills, I picked a paper with a similar texture and thickness to the paper of the poster. And I toned pieces of the paper with watercolor so that the infill wouldn't stand out too much against the natural tone of the poster paper. I shaped the infills to fit in the areas of loss and trimmed and scraped away the excess paper at an angle so there would be a smooth transition where the poster and the infill overlapped. And then used wheat starch paste and Japanese paper to attach the infills. After mending and inpainting, it was time to hinge the poster, which was especially challenging because of the scale and the need to align the sections with one another without actually having the space to lay out the entire billboard simultaneously. I was able to have at least 2 vertical columns laid out at once. So I decided that I would probably be able to get the best alignment by beginning with the 2 center columns and then aligning the outer left and right columns after the middle columns had been hinged. However, I wouldn't have been able to reach to hinge the sections together while they were laid out. So after testing to make sure that it would remove cleanly and easily, I temporarily held the 3 sections of each column in place using a low-tack artist tape and rolled the columns onto a handling tube. I moved each section onto a smaller table to apply the hinges and used a second tube to roll up both ends like a scroll so that I'd be able to reach the center to apply the hinges. The V-hinges were applied as Taina described, but we found that the inks on the billboard were heavily applied, possibly to withstand outdoor display, so they wouldn't wash away when there was rain. And the wheat starch paste didn't adhere quite as firmly as it had on the smaller sizes. So to make sure that the hinges would hold, I added another set of hinges to the back of the sections. Once hinged, the multi-sheet posters were too large to move down to the preparation workspace or up to the galleries while they were flat. So we rolled them onto sturdy archival tubes, which we could move on a rolling cart. These same tubes will be used at the end of the exhibition for the long-term storage of the largest poster sizes. I'm going to talk next about the planning for the mounts that we used for the oversized posters. The planning stages for framing and mounting the posters actually started over 2 years ago while I was still the head preparator. And when I became a conservation associate around a year ago, the prep team, Mike, Andrea, and David, took on executing the plans both for the framing and the mounts, and Mike and Andrea will go into that in more depth shortly. From the earliest planning stages, it was clear that the display of the larger poster sizes would present some challenges. The one-sheet size and smaller could be framed using our usual methods of hinging and corners with overmats, as you see on the left. But 3-sheet and larger we knew would be more of a challenge. The 3 sheets can actually be framed using the same methods as the smaller sizes, as you see on the right. But they do pose some challenges at that size. The larger the size, the greater the cost, more labor, difficulty of storing the frames, and also limitations on available materials. For example, the largest size for most types of mat board is 4 feet by 8 feet, which is smaller than some of our poster sizes. The team did frame a couple of the 3 sheets that were going into the peristyle, where we have food and events and where they benefit from that extra protection. But the 6 sheets and the 24 sheets, we knew from the start that it just wasn't going to be practical to frame those. And even doing all of the 3 sheets would have been challenging and costly to frame traditionally. So in spring of 2022, we really started to think through our options. David is standing with just half of the 24 sheet that you saw me treating earlier, and this is while we were at the beginning stages of planning, so before it had been humidified and flattened. And this is kind of just the point where we were beginning to wrap our heads around what a challenge this exhibition was going to be. I've been talking about cost and material limitations, but I was also interested in showing them in a way that would be truer to how they would have originally been seen. From research and talking with Nancy, I knew that smaller sizes would have been framed and shown in a theater lobby, as you see on the left. But larger sizes were originally pasted to walls, not matted and framed. And I was interested in keeping some of that context while still preserving the condition of the posters. I had some experience with hanging large works in the past without frames. This is the first large work that I mounted with magnets by Lorna Bieber, titled Tapestry, which was shown in the Project Gallery in 2016. After discussing different options with the artist, we decided on magnets for hanging the work and designed a system using a wood cleat covered in steel plates and plastic-coated magnets. You can see the cleat brackets along the top and steel-covered blocks lower down for additional magnets. And on the right, we're raising the work to hang it from the cleat. The biggest pro of this system was just that it worked at all, because the piece was very large and the canvas did have some weight to it. It also has the advantage of being a reusable system, and it's been installed at other museums over the years with this same system. However, there were some drawbacks, the most significant being that the materials weren't fully archival and that the gap between the object and the wall presented the possibility of some physical damages, though we luckily didn't have any issues with damage during the exhibition. This is an image from the Indian Cinema exhibition from 2017. We exhibited many one-sheet size posters in 2 rows going completely around the main gallery walls. The posters that were selected were ones that we had multiple copies of in the collection. So we had many duplicates of these when this collection was acquired by the museum. I came up with a system of using 1 by 1 inch mat board blocks with a magnet inset into the mat board and another magnet on top to hold the poster to the blocks. These blocks were adhered to the wall with double-sided adhesive. We had a lot of posters to get up on a pretty limited budget and on a short time frame. So a pro of this system was that it was fairly quick and cost effective. However, I don't know that I would have used this system if we hadn't had several copies of each of these posters safely preserved in storage, because it did present some preservation risks. There wasn't a barrier between the poster and the dry but still off-gassing fresh paint. I also don't love that you could sometimes see the blocks just a little bit through some of the thinner posters. Around 1.5 years ago, I began testing different methods for making the magnet mounts to see if I could eliminate as many of the cons of the previous mounting system as possible. I decided that by fully covering the wall behind the poster with mat board, we could eliminate the issue of seeing the magnet blocks through the poster, as well as avoiding contact with fresh paint. I tested different sizes of magnets inset into 4-ply board and left the test up for a few months to observe any changes as humidity and temperature changed. While we did see some minor changes, we decided that they were within a range that was acceptable. And I placed orders for all of the materials so the prep team could get to work. And next, Mike and Andrea are going to talk to you more about that.
Thanks, Emily. Today, Andrea and I will talk about the preparation side of crashing into the 60s. With Emily's planning and materials arriving, we were able to start making mounts and framing the posters. The size of the posters was surely the most challenging part of prepping the exhibition. Here you can see David and I hinging the largest window mat that I have ever cut. The size of the mat needed far exceeded the capabilities of our mat cutters, so it had to be cut by hand using a sliding bevel cutter ran along our longest straight edge. This process was repeated to accommodate both of the largest framed works. After the mats were cut, the posters were mounted, then framed in sealed packages to be safely displayed in the peristyle. Around 6 months before install, we started the first of the magnet mounts, beginning with 3-sheet size. First, the board was cut down to the right size to leave a 1-inch border around the poster. Next, we used removable tape to mark the corners and locations for the magnets along the sides. We used Mylar templates to quickly position the locations of the holes, and then the holes were punched out with this handy punch and a hammer. We used a slightly different template along the sides to center holes and punch smaller 1/8 inch holes for the nails that would hold the mounts up on the wall. And I'm going to pass it to Andrea to talk a little bit about the magnets.
All right, so while we were While work was being done on the magnet boards, I was busy working on the actual magnets that would hold the poster in place. Having the magnets painted to match the posters was an integral part of displaying these objects so that the mounting method did not impact the viewing experience. At viewing distance, the magnets appear to blend in with the posters. While posters were laid out on mounting boards, we marked where each magnet would be placed. Once that was determined, I took some photos of each of the locations for reference. Then I used those reference photos and mixed paint to match the colors needed for each of these locations on the posters. This was often difficult given the bright colors, intersecting lines or text, and unique textures and patterns that some of these posters have. When I obtained the correct color match, I painted it onto a strip of P90 tape. This would sometimes take multiple layers of colors, gradients, and brush strokes to have a palette to pick from. Once dry, I used a circle punch to create round stickers to apply to the magnets. I took these painted magnets and compared them to the posters directly to double check the colors and textures matched as closely as possible. Sometimes the color I had created would be correct, but due to the thinness and translucent nature of the P90 tape, once applied to the inherently darker magnet, would then shift the color. To prevent this from happening, I would punch out Tyvek tape circles to layer between the magnet and the painted P90 tape. This required a lot of trial and error to get correct. Once the magnets were complete, I organized them on a metal board so we would know which magnets were for which object, and the order in which the magnets were placed on the poster. Here you can see all of the magnets ready to go for install. In total, it took me over a month to complete more than 430 magnets. Even during install, we added a few magnets to some of the mounts, which required me to create more on the fly.
Thank you, Andrea. Once all the frameworks were hung in the galleries, we started to install the poster mounts. Here you can see we are using a laser level and tape to locate the position of the mount on the wall. We found after installing a couple mounts that adding some double-sided VHB adhesive in the center and bottom edge of the mount would help keep the mount from bowing away from the wall during some challenging humidity changes in the space. Here I am drilling a hole, then nailing the mount into place while David and Andrea are holding the mount up. And Andrea is covering the nails with some Tyvek tape. And here are a couple finished mounts on the right. And here, David and Emily are installing the first of the French grand size posters. We smoothed the paper from the center out and from top down, and Andrea handed the corresponding magnets as they went. And here are the first two posters installed. We started the install with the smallest size posters, graduating to larger sizes as we went, taking what we had learned and practiced from single board mounts and implementing that with larger multi-board mounts. Through the process, we continued to face the challenge of keeping the boards from bowing and buckling on the wall. As previously mentioned, we overcame this by using some double-sided VHB tape. Though we did not foresee the bowing to be exaggerated when multiple boards were butted up against each other. Of course, we knew the answer now was more tape. VHB was added along each adjoining side to create a flush seam between the boards. As the saying goes, we saved the best for last. Our final object installed in the galleries was the massive 24-sheet poster. This 24-sheet represents popular comedy film 1, 2, 3, and the art was created by Saul Bass. The 230-inch wide and 103.5-inch tall poster takes up a majority of the wall it's displayed on. 4 of our mapboard mounts were used behind this poster. 3 of those 4 pieces were made from entire uncut sheets of the largest size mapboard that we could order at 60 inches by 104 inches. The size constraint on the mapboard was nearly perfect and only allowed us to have a 1/4-inch border around the poster. Saving this poster for last turned out to be very helpful. We had learned a lot about our process after 24 smaller posters installed, and were able to tackle the largest. Knew exactly how much VHB tape to use and where to place it on the back of the mounts, and knew the most efficient way to get all 4 mounts on the wall. With that being said, I think this poster may have been the easiest to go up. I also wanted to mention that during the prep process for this exhibition, I was able to use some time to collaborate with our education team to create an interactive activity for the discovery room. Images of 4 different posters were adhered to thicker mat board, backed with magnet sheets, and then cut out. Pre-made magnet boards were bought for the pieces to stick to, and 10 puzzles were made in total, and each one was cut into different sizes and amounts of pieces to vary the difficulty for all to enjoy. I'd like to end by showing a quick time lapse of the 24-sheet poster going up. You can see we started with the magnet mount boards, starting from top going down, and as they would go up, we would nail at the top and peel away the VHB tape on the back, going down and making sure everything is flat and straight. These are nice large sheets of mat board. It definitely was a team effort getting those up. Here's Andrea covering the nails. And once the boards were up, we were able to unroll the posters and get those magnets in place. Thank you very much.
Okay, so before taking questions, if we have questions, we wanted to give special thanks to our conservation and preparation colleagues who were not presenting today, but who were instrumental in making this exhibition possible. Our former assistant conservator, Sarah Casto, who treated several of these posters before she accepted her current position as photograph and paper conservator at the Ohio State University Libraries. Gary Albright, our colleague in private practice, who had previously treated one of these posters and now treated 2 more. David Russo, our head preparator, who is currently on leave, but led the preparation and installation of the exhibition. And Sarah Sampson, who recently joined our prep team and will be working on the deinstall and deframing of the exhibition. We also want to thank the curators, Nancy and Peter, and all our other colleagues here at the museum. An exhibition like this is always a multi-departmental effort and requires lots and lots of collaboration. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Taina, Emily, Mike, and Andrea. This was such an informative lecture, just on everything, every detail that went into putting the posters on the wall before the show even opened. So thank you so much. And I would love to, are there any questions? Please put them in the Q&A box, because I'm sure that there's something brewing. I want to remind folks again that this show goes down on September 8th. So if you are in the area, which many in the chat indicated that they are, I highly recommend visiting and seeing the magnets in person and seeing all the efforts that went into this. Okay, we have a question. What ply mat board did you all use for the 24-sheet poster?
So that was a 4-ply mat board. I don't believe we were able to find or get the 8-ply, anything thicker for the at that larger size. But that was all 4-ply mat board.
Okay, another one. For a future exhibition, would you go about the magnet mounts differently? What were the pros and cons for this round? I love the previous comparisons.
If you don't mind me saying something in there, Mike,
Go for it.
I did find that like from the smaller scale sample that I did to the larger ones in the gallery, that in the gallery space, and just to like also clarify a little bit, we were making some improvements to the HVAC system actually while the installation was going on. So the amount of humidity change that we saw was not typical for us. It was because we were having some improvements made. And the amount of change that humidity had on the mat board was a little unexpected. So I wouldn't necessarily change what we did in terms of the mat board, but I would definitely have investigated further, like the timing on the changes to our systems to make sure that those changes in fluctuations in humidity wouldn't have been right when we were installing, because I think that really added to the challenge with the mounts. Would you agree, Mike?
I would agree.
Great. Another question. They say, wonderful job. After deinstalling, how will these posters be stored for the long term?
Well, they certainly will not be folded. So Emily actually had in one of her slides, there were those tubes with large diameter, so they will be rolled with interleaving. We also will keep, because now the Japanese paper hinges are also just between the horizontal seams, so we will keep the hinges there as well, and then they will be stored rolled.
Thank you, Taina. All right, another question came in. It says, please share some of the education, training, etc. that the conservators had before starting their start at GEM.
Well, I'm from Finland, Europe, so it's probably a little different than it would be here, but I was first a photographer. I studied photography, and then I learned about conservation kind of accidentally. I just happened to attend a lecture, and then I went back to school. So in Finland, the school, it was 4 years, and yeah, long time ago. And Emily's situation was a little different. Why don't you share?
I have a BFA in photography, and I have an MA in photographic preservation and collections management. More typically, someone going into the conservation field would have a master's specifically in conservation and would have pursued a graduate degree through a conservation program. In my case, I worked as a conservation technician for 4 years, was the head preparator here for about 8 years. And Taina, when she had an opening in the conservation lab, very grateful that she considered me as a candidate and has been training me in conservation treatments for the past year.
Thank you both. Mike and Andrea, do you want to give just a little bit of background on you as well, just for our preps, for the preparator side of education and training and what your background looks like?
Sure. Growing up, in high school, I did a lot of, my first job was handling and scanning microfiche film. So I guess my art and document handling started then. Went to art school and studied illustration and design. While there, worked in a gallery and kind of fell in love with displaying other people's artwork, I guess, and making my making my own for people. After college, I worked as an intern at Brookfield Zoo, digitizing and handling their archives and photographs. And from there, I worked in a commercial frame shop for about five or 6 years before starting here.
And for me, I'm from upstate New York originally. I was always interested in art and photography growing up, and I ended up going to RIT for photography and graduated there in 2015. And while I was there, I actually did an internship here at the George Eastman Museum in the Department of Photography, doing some collection management and archiving work. And then after I graduated, I fell into some custom framing and did that in different shops for about 8 years before landing here at the Eastman Museum, which was ultimately my goal since I had interned here. I just really loved my time here and wanted to make it back here, and now I can frame for the museum that I love. So that's a little bit about me.
That's amazing. Thank you all for sharing. I feel like the background and education components are so important, especially with our field. Another question we have is, instead of in-painting the magnets to match, did you consider printing out reproductions of the areas where magnets were to be placed?
That was actually something that we considered and talked about. In this case, these were very large, so that's made making a digital reproduction is made easier if you can have really good control of lighting and to color match very precisely to the poster. And in this case, these were so large that they couldn't be fully laid out in the photo studio, some of them. So some of the digitization of these posters actually didn't happen until they were up in the gallery, where the museum's photographer could photograph them vertically. So it was an idea that we explored, and I think it's an interesting idea, and in some cases would have been a really nice solution. But in this case, we did go with painting because at the time that seemed like the way that we would most easily be able to execute that.
All right, on to the next one. How did you apply the humidity treatment to the largest poster panels? Did they fit in the sink, or did you have to approach it differently?
Everything actually fit into the sink. So even if the poster itself is large, the sections are pretty much the same size. Early on, we were humidifying some of the sections kind of folded, but then we started to everything was unfolded and fit in there well. Yeah.
Great. While you first used the magnet for the oversized item, did you also use hinges at the top?
Not when we were using the magnet mounts. There were no hinges between the mount and the object.
Okay. Emily, we have a question specifically for you. Where is your master's from? That program sounds like something I'd be very interested in.
The exact program that I was enrolled in, originally it was a program that was 1 year at the Toronto Metropolitan University, which at that time was called Ryerson University, and 1 year here at the George Eastman Museum. And that exact program no longer exists, but there is still a similar program at the Toronto Metropolitan University. It's no longer a joint program, though, between the George Eastman Museum and Toronto.
Okay, I have one more question, and I do think it's a fun one to end on. Do you have any recommendations or best practice for how to display posters at home?
If the size allows, I would say matted and framed.
I would agree with Taina.
All right, are there any other questions? We do have a few more minutes left, but we did get through quite a bit today. All right. If you have other further questions, you are welcome to email us at info@eastman.org, and we will get those questions circled out to those who can best answer the question for you. Once again, Taina, Emily, Mike, Andrea, thank you so much for a lovely presentation with so much information. And we are also grateful to everyone that participated in the lecture who asked a question. We are so grateful for you. We do have another virtual program coming up in September, where the Department of Photography will be talking about our selections from the collections, and you can register for that on our website too. But once again, thank you so much for spending the afternoon with us, and I hope you all have a great day.